because I feel oftentimes the same way of almost like paralysis, if you will, of like I had this momentum and in the conference I had a bunch of momentum and now I'm home. And did I leave the momentum at the airport? Because now I feel almost stuck. Like I don't know which direction I should go in. And then also I see the people that kind of work the room so masterfully. And there's days, honestly, like I'm a social introvert. That's how I consider myself. But there's people that are genuinely extroverts. They want to be on. They want to get there at 8 o'clock in the morning. They want to stay the whole time, go out for drinks, go out for dinner, and do that whole thing. Well, I'm an only child, and so I need those pockets of alone time for myself. And I can't turn it on for the entire length that everybody else can. And even that can be a moment for me where I think, well, come on, Mo, just get up and do it. And it's only 3 more hours of drinks and dinner. But for me, I need that time to recharge. And even that can be a point of comparison of, well, you're missing these hours when someone else is out there kind of doing these things. But at the end of the day, you kind of get older and you realize, I'm happy with who I am and I'm not going to necessarily be like this person. And you kind of become more comfortable with your choices. And so that's at the place where I am now of saying, you know what, my max is maybe 12 hours in a room with people. And then I need to go back and I need to recharge. I can't do any more. That's it.
You're listening to The Creative Imposter, episode number 70. Welcome to The Creative Imposter. I'm Andrea Klunder, and I have fantastic news. Are you a podcaster by chance? Are you going to Podcast Movement in Philly this July? If so, Wednesday morning, 11 a.m., mark it in your schedule. I'm going to be speaking all about the podcast mentoring program that I do with high school students on the south side of Chicago. We'll be talking about working with diverse populations, students with special needs, and how to create your own mentoring program and why this might be something that you want to do. I would love to see you there at Podcast Movement. I would love to get your feedback on my talk. And I'm super, super, super honored and excited to be representing the brand new track that they've added for podcasting with social impact. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it's not marketing. It's not tech. It's not how to start your podcast. It's taking it deeper, 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 inspired by the fabulous Elsie Escobar of She Podcasts, and also inspired by She Podcasts or directly from the She Podcasts Facebook group comes today's guest, Monica Rivera, who I'm going to tell you about in just a moment. But first, I want to give a shout out for the shout out on Apple Podcasts for The Creative Imposter. We got a 5-star review from Rockstars BL or Rockstar SBL. Not sure. The review says, I love how Andrea's show always gives me new ideas as well as validation for what I'm already thinking about. Brava. Thank you so much for the 5-star review entitled Always Interesting and Informative. Well, I have an interesting and informative guest for you today. Monica Rivera is the producer and host of You Wanna Do What? Podcast. And I mentioned that I discovered her through the She Podcasts Facebook group. So one of the cool things about that group is that every Wednesday there's a thread where you can post your most recent episode. And there's this thing that I like to do that I discovered Monica does as well, which is to scroll through that thread toward the end of the day and see what catches my attention that I've never noticed before. Put a few new episodes for new shows in my queue, and a lot of them I won't subscribe to. A lot of them I listen to the first few seconds of, and then either the audio quality turns me off, or it just doesn't sound like something I'm that interested in after all. But every once in a while, I find a new show that I absolutely love and immediately subscribe to, and Monica's show, You Wanna Do What? Was one of those podcasts. When I started listening to Monica, I was like, I want to be friends with this woman. And thanks to making connections at podcast conferences, we're friends now. And I have her here on the show talking about, what else? Imposter syndrome. And Monica actually has a story that I love about how she got started with podcasting and where the idea for her show came from. I also love that podcasting is not Monica's full-time business. She has a day job, and podcasting is this side thing that she decided to do because it really drew her interest and her curiosity and her desire to get a message out to people and to make an impact in the way that people are living their lives and the quality of their lives. And well, Monica can say it better than I can, so let me just bring you to the interview. Here's my conversation with Monica Rivera.
So I actually bought a microphone October of 2013 because I wanted to start a podcast. I had been listening for about 10 years at that point, and I said, I think this would be a lot of fun to do. I didn't have any sort of idea of where I wanted to go or what I wanted it to be, but I knew I wanted to say something. I buy this mic in 2013, and then I do nothing with it. It sits on the desk. Andrea, I don't even know if it works because I had never plugged it in to turn it on. And I have it, and I feel like every time I walk past my office, it's kind of staring at me like, oh, so I'm just going to collect dust. We're not going to do anything with me. And eventually I would just keep walking past it. And then I decided in 2017, I think I have something to say, but I still don't know what that is. So I signed up for a Spartan race. And the Spartan race is an obstacle course challenge. It's about 5.5 miles. And I said, you know what? Now I think I have something to talk about. So let me start a podcast. So I thought it was a great idea. I'll do this physical challenge. And 3 days later, I will also decide I'm going to start a podcast because that makes a lot of sense. But for so long, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I didn't know what I wanted to say. I'm thinking, here I am, corporate America. I know that I'm feeling stuck in my job. I don't know what comes next for me. But everyone keeps saying, just find your passion. Find that one thing. Follow your bliss. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, I have a lot of things I like. So which one do I follow? It's almost like if you remember that book, What Color is Your Parachute? Mm-hmm. It's like, well, I have a bunch of parachutes. So which parachute are we talking about? Mm-hmm. And that's what I kept feeling, really stuck into that decision of needing to pick one thing. So I intentionally created a podcast that was very broad because I work in something that's also very niche. So why do I want to do something else that's very niche? And if I'm going to create a show, I'm going to create it on my own terms. And I started my podcast, summer 2017.
So that's something that we hear a lot, I think, in podcasting is, oh, you should think of something that's really niche, that's really specific. Take your idea and drill it down to the most specific thing. And the riches are in the niches or however they say that. And you just totally went against that.
But what's interesting is that the podcasts that I listen to actually aren't very niche at all. So it's almost as if I didn't have a real frame of reference about these, I'll say, rules and quotes as to how you were supposed to start, because the shows I listened to, so as an example, Bill Simmons' podcast was the first show I ever listened to. At the time, it was called The BS Report. And yes, it was an ESPN family of shows, but he didn't just talk about sports. He talked about the reality TV show Survivor. He talked about MTV The Challenge. He brought his dad on the show. He brought his college buddies on the show. So he didn't just stick to sports. He kind of married all of his interests. So pop culture and food, and then also a little bit of sports. And I listened to a lot of shows that had a really wide array of topics that they discussed. So for me at the time, I wasn't thinking about, the Radio Horse Network or the Horse Radio Network, I think it's called, and having to be super specific about that. And that's great that that was out there, but those weren't the types of shows that I was listening to. So therefore, I didn't model my show after one of the more niche podcasts.
A lot of people start a podcast because they want to promote something specific, like they start it for business reasons,
right,
or for entrepreneurial reasons, or because they do have one really specific hobby or passion, like if they're sharing a gaming podcast or something like that. And then there are people who feel you just love podcasting so much. There's something magical about it that is inspiring to you, that it's actually the act of making the podcast and sharing your voice and having something to explore and make connections in this really unique way. That's the most compelling thing.
Yeah, that is definitely part of it as well. And also I have a message that I really wanted to share with other people. And so it really was rooted in, I had this message of wanting to talk to other people, working professionals, probably doing the same 9-to-5 thing, And maybe they've gone into routine. Maybe they're feeling a little stuck and not having as much fun as they used to have. And they need this nudge to explore their interests, to get back to their hobbies, to figure out what their passions are. And they're just not doing it because we get so caught up in a cycle of rinse and repeat. And I wanted to talk to that audience because we don't have an infinite amount of time. And even though I felt very stuck, I was still doing a lot of other things outside of work. And I realized that a lot of other people weren't. And I was always very curious about why that was and why people weren't kind of making the time for those different things. So if I could find a way to encourage those people to kind of have a little bit of a richer type of life, and that has nothing to do with money, has nothing to do with success or weight loss and all these big hot button topics that everyone buys into, but how can you just make your day-to-day a little bit better? That's who I wanted to talk to. And now, almost a year later, is when I start to think about, oh, I definitely see why people give the advice of finding a niche and using it as a tactic for a business as opposed to just a podcast, because now I start to think about those things. But I still love doing the show and I want to continue doing it. And the message is still the same. Now it's just about finding if there are other vehicles in order to share that message.
Do you have any specific goals with your podcast? I know one thing that I think a lot and that people ask about a lot is measuring success, right? In anything that we do. How do we know we're successful? And the easy way to do it is with numbers and downloads and statistics and how many followers do I have here and there and how many people are listening to my show. But for you, do you see the podcast leading to something else, or how do you know that you are on the right track, and how do you measure your success with what you're doing?
Sure. So my full daytime job is in analytics. So I am all about measurement all the time. And I think I just can't turn that part of my brain off because it's so embedded into me at this point. So at a very basic metric, it's always this month's numbers have to be better than last month's numbers. And if that's not happening, then I have to change something in my process or my systems in order to improve those numbers. So at a very basic level, it's always beat whatever I did last month. And then the second thing I would say is, are people finding out about me? So are people coming to me saying they're listening to my show? And so this month was really an exciting month for me because I had other people reach out to me saying, hey, I want you to come interview someone, or I'm a PR person and I want to connect you with this person and I'll set up everything, but can you come interview this person face to face? So people are starting, I guess, to know that the show exists and know that I exist. And I also this year was very intentional about beginning to invite guests onto the show. And I always wanted to do that. But honestly, I was green behind the microphone when I started. So would I be of service to the guest if I didn't have any experience doing this and I yet wasn't comfortable behind the mic? I couldn't do that to a guest. So I needed to feel confident in what I was doing before I was going to then open up that platform and maybe not ask the right questions, maybe not edit the show the best way, maybe not roll out the episode in the correct fashion, the way that I might do it now. And so this year I started to invite guests, and that's just opened up another path for me. So as I think about the future ahead and what my goals are, it's to continue to get really interesting guests for my audience to connect with and to also learn from, because you can only say the same thing so many times as yourself, as an individual, before they say, okay, Monica, we get it. Can we hear about something else? So I don't want to be one note. So the guests help me enhance the show, I think. And then I also would like to go to audiences and speak to them directly and move more into public speaking space. So I have a lot of experience public speaking when it comes to my day job, but not as much when it comes to podcasting. And so that's a goal I have in mind for myself.
You're so funny. You're the opposite of me. When I first started my podcast, I originally was going to just do interviews, and I recorded probably 6 or 7 interviews before I actually launched, and I hadn't edited them all. And I was starting to realize how much time it takes to actually produce interview episodes and to, especially because I really wanted them to be good quality and I wanted to make sure they were edited, and I was learning how to edit myself, and I was still on that learning curve, and I really did not totally know what I was doing. And I'm like, oh my God, if I do all interview shows, I'm going to publish like 1 episode a month, maybe. because it just
Yeah.
takes so much time. And so I only started doing solo episodes as a way to save time and have more content. But I was way more nervous. I was still nervous about doing the interviews, but I was way more nervous about doing solo episodes because I felt like, who on earth wants to tune in to listen to me talk about whatever? You know?
Right.
So I was like trying to hide behind the expertise or the allure or whatever of my guests. And then what I found actually, and I'll say this about your show too, but what I found is that I get more listens and downloads when there are interviews, and I suspect it's because there's two of us and because most of my guests are doing a pretty good job of sharing out the episodes and promoting them. And so I'm getting some of their people, and that helps my numbers to grow because someone new will discover the show through them and then be like, oh, I kind of like this. Let me check out the rest of it. But my regular listeners, like my hardcore followers and subscribers, love the solo episodes. And I'm kind of the same way too, where I'm like, oh yeah, I like Monica's interview episodes a lot, but I really love your solo episodes so much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And so the goal, what I would like to do is kind of exchange. So have a solo episode, an interview, a solo and an interview, and kind of go back and forth in that way. Mm-hmm. This past month was the only time I did back-to-back interview episodes, and that is because I can't get rid of this nagging cough, and I just couldn't do a full episode. I was trying to do it, and it was just taking so much time, and I was coughing my way through it. And I said, you know what? I think I'll just put back-to-back interviews out, and in the intro, I will talk about, I have this cough. I'm going to come back to you guys. I don't want you to think the format is changing, but this is where I am in the process.
So what have been the biggest challenges for you along the way on this journey of buying the microphone, letting it sit there collecting dust and judge you with its side eye from your from your office to where you are now and where you're thinking of growing? What have been the hardest parts along the way?
Oh, honestly, Andrea, I feel like there's new challenges all the time. Editing is a bear. It's funny that you mentioned about how long it takes to edit an interview episode, because the first one that I had ever done, which was at Darius, and it took me, and I kid you not, 13 hours to edit the episode.
I'm not surprised.
And I just thought, oh my gosh. And at the end of it, I was super excited like you, I heavily edit. I was super excited with how it turned out. But it was one of those things that I almost turned to either side of me. And I was like, is anyone going to high five me? But it's like, no, it's just me editing this. So like, no one knows about this work that you've put into it. So I just had to give myself the pat on the back, like, yeah, you did it. So editing continues to be a bit of a bear for me. And then always kind of thinking about how can I make the show better? And it's always that push-pull of having these dual careers almost, because I still have the full-time job. I'm doing this and feeling as if I'm not putting enough into the podcasting, even though I put so much of my extra time outside of work into this. It's always feeling like I wish I had more time, that I could do more with the show, or whether it's things that support the show. So the challenge would be time for me and how to get that done.
Time. It's so elusive. Time. You were talking about how the message that you really want to share is this encouragement and motivation. And I feel like your show, it doesn't feel life coachy, but it does feel very motivational, giving you just that little push to do what you know you need to do, or you know you could do. What do you think it is about you and your personality that you are someone who pushes forward and tries new things and wants to learn things and isn't just going to let yourself be defined by your job? Because I really agree with you. I think that that is something that is so common, where we feel like, oh, I have this career and maybe I'm super successful at it and maybe I don't even really hate it, but it's the only thing I do, and I'm letting myself just totally be defined by this. And there's almost sort of this feeling of, if I didn't have this job, how would I define myself, or who would I be? So where does it come from that you want to make sure that you're creating this more, I don't want to say well-rounded because that sounds like 1980 something, but this fuller, more robust and diverse life for yourself?
So I would say it's definitely two things, and no one's asked me that, so I love the fact that you did ask. So I would say one personal and one professional thing. So my grandmother, who I loved and adored, always wanted to go see Spain. And it was always on her list of wanting to do that. And my grandmother was very progressive. So she was a career woman, had worked her whole life for the telephone company in a manager role, and earned her own money. And I say that to say that she was married with my grandfather, but she had her own money, but she didn't have the independence at home to say, well, hey, I earn my own money, so I'll just go to Spain without you. I don't necessarily need your permission to go to Spain. But she was also very traditional. And so when my grandfather said, no, we're saving the money, we're not going to Spain, she said, okay. And I remember she passed away never having visited Spain. And about 6 months after she passed away, there had been a school trip that was coming up. And it was one of those trips where you could go to Europe. And it was to visit France and Spain. And at the time, I was a teenager. I hadn't really traveled much outside of the Bronx. And occasionally I went into the city, to Manhattan. But I really hadn't traveled much at that point. But I remember my grandmother saying, I'm going to contribute to that you can go on to this trip. And I went to Spain, and I remember thinking how sad it was that my grandmother never got to go see it because she kept thinking that there was more time or that one day my grandfather would come around to this, but it actually never happened. And now here I was almost trying to see Spain through her eyes because she couldn't actually go do that. And so that was always a really significant thing to me when people think I can do this in retirement, or I can take that trip, 5 years from now, or I can try that another time. Never knowing that if you have that time, is that time really going to come? So if you have an opportunity, I think it's always important to take it. And so after that, I began traveling. I remember I had seen, it was either a commercial or a television show about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I must have been 17 years old at the time. And I packed a bag, and this was when Priceline was all the rage, right? So kind of dating myself. And I go on Priceline, and I find a hotel in Cleveland. I book the hotel. And I'm seeing my dad, and he asked, where are you going with the bag? I said, I'm driving to Cleveland. He's like, you're going to Cleveland? I said, yes, I'm going to go see the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And he thought I was nuts, but he always thought I was a little bit nuts. So I was like, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And he said, all right, well, let me know you got there safely. And I went out there, and I saw the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Lake Erie, and I think I saw Phantom of the Opera out there. And that was kind of the start of my journey to make sure that I led a fuller life. And then very quickly, the second story, when I graduated college, I had a job working for a pretty large bank. And I worked my ass off at this job. And I was the type of person at 2 o'clock in the morning, I would leave voicemail so people would have it on Monday when they came into the office. And I put a lot into that. I had gotten a new manager who had helped get the job. He was coming over from another company. And I remember after working so many years and promoted and kind of doing the whole corporate ladder thing, that person came into the role and he took away much of my responsibilities and gave it to someone he brought into the company and gave him a lot of the stuff that I had been doing. And I remember thinking, oh, this is how the corporate game works. Got it. Now I know that I will never put the 100% that I was putting into this particular job anymore, because I need to look at it like this is my business. This is not personal, and I can't treat it the same way. And so knowing that those things could happen at a moment's notice from people that you would never suspect was a great lesson. I'm not bitter about it. I think it was super valuable, and I'm so happy that I learned it early on, because that allowed me the latitude to become who I am now.
Yeah, it seems like there's a theme running through your stories of this sort of self-determination and making sure that, I mean, we're never really totally in control, to be honest, but making sure that you are making choices for yourself and you're not just letting things unfold in whatever way they will, that you have agency and that you have choice and that you have leverage in the things that you're doing.
No, for sure. And that's the same thing that I would like to see for other people. Like you listen to the show, but for other people who don't, one of the things I always try to say, and hopefully I'm never heavy-handed in my approach, but really just encouraging, is that it doesn't have to be the big thing. I understand that not everyone can say, hey, I'm blowing this whole life off I have here so I can spend 3 weeks in Bali on a beach. I get it. But if you can say, you know what, I always wanted to go by this restaurant that I walk past all the time. Why don't I stop in and actually go dine in this restaurant? It can be something as simple as that. But instead of just saying, oh, I got to it one day and then that restaurant closes down, and you're like, hey, you know what, Andrew, I never got to go eat at that restaurant. Just take the hour and go eat at the restaurant. It can be little things like that and those experiences that then lead you to want to do the next experience.
So what do you think actually holds us back from doing those things? What keeps us stuck in our routines or in our, oh, I'll do that later mode?
I think we fill up our lives with a lot of excuses. I think we like to say that we don't have the time, but if we really quantified how we spend our day, there goes my analytics coming again, we would realize that we probably do have more time than we think. I remember a friend who loves movies, absolutely adores movies, and he moved to a home in New Jersey. And I asked him, hey, so what's up? What's the last movie you saw? I know you love going to movies. And he said, oh, I haven't been to the movies in 7 months. And I asked why. And he said, well, I come home and I'm just so tired and then I have to do laundry. And I said, oh, do you take the laundry out to the backyard and you do it by hand? And he laughed at me, and I could be a little bit of a smartass. And he said, well, no. And I'm like, okay, so it sounds to me like you just have to put the laundry in the washing machine. The washing machine does the rest for you. And so he kind of rolled his eyes. But then I talked to him about it, like, well, what if you did this at night, right? Like you separated the clothes at night. As soon as you got in the door, you sort of put them to wash and kind of just created like a better way to actually do it. So that you're not saying, well, I can't go to the movies in 7 months because I have laundry. Like laundry is always going to be something that's there unless you're wealthy enough that you can kind of keep buying new clothes and you never have to clean the one you own. But those are the types of things that I don't think people stop to realize, like, yeah, that doesn't make sense. Like I had to have time in 7 months to see a movie and it can't just be about the laundry. So I think people get used to the excuses they make to themselves or the stories that we tell ourselves about why we can't do something.
And speaking of stories that we tell ourselves, you know that the main theme of this show is imposter syndrome and the idea that even though we may have accomplished something, even though we may have had some success in some area of our lives or in our work, and even though we may have received compliments for things, that for some reason we still have this nagging self-doubt or this nagging like inability to be like, yeah, you know what? I am pretty awesome and I am successful and I did do this thing. And there's still like that little voice that's constantly like comparing ourselves and our work and what we do to other people, or this little voice that's telling us like, you don't deserve that, or who do you think you are? Is this something that ever comes up for you, and where does it show up?
Oh, for sure. So there's a quote that reads, comparison is the thief of joy. And while I love the quote, I am guilty of it all the time. I am either comparing myself to myself, right? So what I think I should be doing versus what I am doing, which I think is like the worst kind, because you're with yourself all the time. So you're constantly almost at war if you let yourself be. And then also what I find interestingly enough is when I come home from any sort of industry event or career event, I sometimes get into a little bit of a low period because you're around all these really great people, and then you come home, and if it's a great event, you have a bunch of ideas, and you also start to think, well, should I do this one or should I do this one? And this person's doing that, and that's working, but I thought I remembered this other person saying I shouldn't do this anymore. And you start kind of comparing, well, this person's running their operation this way, this person's doing this kind of podcast, and they said they have 5 million downloads on the first day of their episodes, and what am I doing wrong? So I think those are the two times that I kind of feel it most significantly. And some days, honestly, I just have to sit in that space and let me feel it and just kind of go through it of kind of beating myself up a little bit, and then the next day hoping that it gets better. But I never kind of try to force myself out of something that I'm feeling. I really believe in like sometimes you just have to like sit in the crap. And I know that sounds terrible, but you have to just kind of like sit in it and feel it and then just kind of move through it as opposed to kind of avoiding it and going around it.
I totally get that feeling when I go to conferences or events and then I'm on that high, right, of the ideas and the adrenaline and the connections and all that stuff. And then I get home and everything's the same. And I have all these ideas that I'm never going to implement. And then this person is doing this really cool thing. And this person got all this attention. And I like printed all these business cards and I brought them with me and I still have most of them because
Right.
I didn't do what I should have done, or, oh, I didn't capitalize on this. I didn't seize the opportunity enough. I didn't, and I'm constantly beating myself up for these mysterious missed opportunities that I somehow should have seen or taken. I don't know. It's a really weird thing that happens to me post-conference.
No, I absolutely agree with you, because I feel oftentimes the same way, of almost like paralysis, if you will, of like I had this momentum, and in the conference I had a bunch of momentum, and now I'm home. And did I leave the momentum at the airport? Because now I feel almost stuck. Like I don't know which direction I should go in. And then also I see the people that kind of work the room so masterfully. And there's days, honestly, like I'm a social introvert. That's how I consider myself. But there's people that are genuinely extroverts. They want to be on. They want to get there at 8 o'clock in the morning. They want to stay the whole time, go out for drinks, go out for dinner, and do that whole thing. Well, I'm an only child, and so I need those pockets of alone time for myself. And I can't turn it on for the entire length that everybody else can. And even that can be a moment for me where I think, well, come on, Mo, just get up and do it. And it's only 3 more hours of drinks and dinner. But for me, I need that time to recharge. And even that can be a point of comparison of, well, you're missing these hours when someone else is out there kind of doing these things. But at the end of the day, you kind of get older and you realize, I'm happy with who I am, and I'm not going to necessarily be like this person. And you kind of become more comfortable with your choices. And so that's at the place where I am now, of saying, you know what, my max is maybe 12 hours in a room with people. And then I need to go back and I need to recharge. I can't do any more. That's it.
I think the last podcast movement that I went to in Anaheim, I was actually staying with a friend. So it was like a 15 to 20 minute Uber ride away from the hotel. So I wasn't staying at the actual hotel. I usually try to wake up and not miss more than maybe the first session of the day and make sure I go to all the sessions. And then there's the social events afterwards. And then I'm usually too tired and too drained from people to go to the social events. I'm like, what's wrong with me? It's 7 o'clock and all I can do is barely keep my eyes open. And it's not even just the social, but it's like when you're going to all the sessions, you're learning, right? And so you're soaking in all this information. And last conference, I actually decided to flip it and focus on the social stuff and do less sessions. And I gave myself permission to not set an alarm and just wake up when I woke up at my friend's house and then casually get ready and then show up to the conference center when I showed up. And it made a huge difference to roll in at 11 and then be able to stay and have the energy for the evening. So I totally get that social introvert thing. It makes a big difference when you can know yourself.
Right.
And set some healthy boundaries for yourself so that whatever you are showing up for, you can be at your max, like at your peak.
Exactly. No, I love that idea. I've never thought about actually doing that, but it probably makes a lot of sense for me as I think about other events that are coming up this year to maybe save a little bit extra in the tank for those social events and maybe not feel like I need to attend every single session. So I'm going to definitely try that.
Yay.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Thank you. No.
I know that you talk on your show a lot about mindset and the importance of mindset. And it's one of those things that I feel like it's much like self-care or mindfulness or authenticity, where they're good words and they mean something really useful and positive. But for some reason, we tend to suddenly they become a buzzword and they're kind of overused and they're kind of like, okay, we're going to talk about mindset yet again on yet another podcast. But I feel like even if you're not using that word specifically, you do talk a lot about that. Why do you think mindset is so important? And what is a good way, or what is your best advice for someone who is really looking for a shift in mindset?
So you're right. I actually don't say the word mindset. And I think it's probably because I don't think of it in those terms, but it really boils down to that. So it really is about that. So the reason that I say that is because I've been in the places where I've been really low energy. I've had things where I've not wanted to get out of bed, where I've neglected myself, work, anything related to fitness. Like my bed and I are tied together as one, and that's it. And so I've lived in those spaces of knowing how that feels and knowing that above anything else, what I think and how I think about something is really where it starts, at least for me. It all starts from that point. Because if I'm feeling like shit, or I'm feeling really sad, or I like to say if I'm in the feels, whatever those feels might be, then I can't do anything else in that moment. And the moment can even last a day, 2 days, maybe a week. And because I've been in those places before, I know how important it is for me to fight against it if it were to happen again. Mm-hmm. And so what I tell people, and I tell myself, so it's the same thing, so it's not anything I would say anything different, is that you just have to, sometimes I give myself a cutoff. Like, you can be in your field until 12:30. And at 12:31, you need to get out of your funk and do something. Go for a walk, talk to a friend, not talk to a friend about whatever's happening, just talk to a friend about something entirely different. Mm-hmm. But and don't watch television. You're just ruminating your thoughts at that point. It's just more white noise. But put on music that you like, go for a walk, try to exercise, but just do one thing for yourself and give yourself that cutoff. And it does make a difference. There's so many times where I'll get into this mode where I have so much going on and I don't want to work out. But in the back of my mind, it's almost like a PC or a laptop that's running. You know, there's all this operating stuff going on in the back, but you just actually don't see it or hear it. Mm-hmm. I think in the back of my mind, you need to work out. You need to work out. You need to work out. And I don't work out. But every day that thought is with me until I decide to go work out. And then I'm always like, well, I don't know why I don't work out more often. I feel amazing after doing this. Mm-hmm. But you just kind of have to do that one thing. And it can be so small, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I like to break everything up into time as much as possible because I feel like that's measurable. Anybody can do anything for 5 minutes, but just give yourself that time. If it's a beautiful day out and you're out for 5 minutes, I guarantee you're not going to want to turn around and come back home at the 6th minute. You're going to stay out a little bit longer. Maybe you'll buy yourself an ice cream cone. Maybe you'll go stop at the pharmacy and look around for like makeup or whatever you want to get, but you'll stay out a little bit longer and that will have gotten you out of bed. So to me, it's just about trying to take that action because I know where I've been before.
That is so true. I feel like sometimes I'm the queen of procrastination. And I mean, this was just happening to me yesterday. I had a client deadline for a creative project, for a creative podcasting project. And all I needed to do was create a 2 minute or less, and it ended up being like 1 minute and 12 seconds. So a 2 minute or less teaser episode for this new podcast for this client. And we had a concept that we had discussed. We were just in New York, near you in your stomping grounds. And we had recorded specific content for this trailer. And I had the new theme music for the show. Mm-hmm. And I had the whole afternoon, so starting from noon until the end of the day, to create this 2 minute or less thing. And I was listening to content over and over again. I kept listening to the music. I got up and made coffee. I went to a co-working space. I chatted with a couple of people I knew at the co-working space. I ate half a donut. I walked around. I made a phone call. I sent some emails. And I was like, why can't I make this thing? I know exactly what I need to do, but I can't. I did everything I could possibly think of to not do the one thing that I needed to do in the day. And then I left the co-working space because it was closing and came home and was complaining to my partner. I was like, I don't want to make this thing. I don't want to make this thing. I hate this project. I hate this project. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. He was like trying to give me helpful advice. And then at some point he just put his earbuds in, I think, and stopped listening to me. Because I was like, it's okay. It's fine. You don't have to keep trying to fix this for me. I'm really just venting. And I don't know why I'm being such a baby about this thing that's so not a big deal. And I know why I was procrastinating it is because I was worried that I wasn't going to do a good job. I was worried that I was going to fail or that the client wouldn't be happy. And the longer I kept putting it off, then I don't have to deal with that feeling of doing a sucky job on it, right?
That makes a lot of sense. That's usually how I am with editing. And that makes sense as to why I put it off because I'm the same way. I'm saying, well, you know what? I have to do laundry. I'll do laundry. Mm-hmm. I'm going to clean up the kitchen. I'm going to send these emails out. Let me look at what else is on my to-do list. And I'll start checking those things off. And the big thing, which is editing, takes the most time. It's like, well, now it's 9:30 at night. I can't edit now. It's going to take me too long. And then I want to push it off until the next day. But it's almost like that. They say whatever takes the most amount of effort is the thing that you should do first. So that's always kind of the way it goes. Go in with the full tank and do that. And so again, it's, we're works in progress. So we have to try to commit to those things. But of course, it's always challenging to do those things where we're like, what if this doesn't come out right? Or what if the audio sounds crappy? Or what if the person's not happy with it at the end result? I want to delay knowing that answer for as long as possible.
So true. And then in the end, I mean, I think it was 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night when I finally just did cut the stupid thing, sent them to the client. And even though it was night, they listened to it right away because they were anticipating it. And they were like, it's amazing. I love it. And I'm like, see, why? What was in my head that it took me like 6 hours to prepare to do that one thing? But anyway, that's just a long story to say I totally feel you on that.
We'll get better at it.
Exactly. So your show is You Want to Do What? And you talk a lot about, or you like to ask your guests, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you always talk about these new things that you're trying and these new challenges that you're giving yourself. So you've conquered the podcasting thing. You've started doing interviews. You've done a lot of other things in your personal life that people should go find out about by listening to your show for sure. And then what's next for you?
So professionally, I do want to get more into the speaking gigs because I like to talk with people one-on-one and kind of have that connection and maybe just kind of be a more human person to them instead of just, voices in their ears every week. And try to make those connections and see what I can do to help when it comes to that. Because again, like I said, we focus so much on professional development, we focus on financial wealth, but I don't think that we always focus on these other things. So if I can try to change that just a little bit, I would love to do that. And then from a personal standpoint, I have some bucket list places that I want to visit. I've visited 48 of the 50 states.
Whoa.
So I am trying to get to my last two, which are Alaska and Hawaii. And I would like to see Hawaii this year. So that's something for me. I want to hike the Rotahana in one of the islands. And I have a book and I'm ready to go. I know the route. It's just about actually getting out there and doing it and creating that space for myself. So that's, I would say, one of my more immediate personal goals. And then also just being a great aunt to my beautiful nieces who are just these adorable little girls and, just trying to spend time with them and be like a good person to them.
My last question for you is my favorite question that I ask all of my guests, which is there anything else that you want to share? Any last thoughts that you want to leave our listeners with?
Yes, I want to tell people, if you listen to this episode and you liked it at all, the one thing I ask, it isn't even about listening to my show. It's just do one thing that's completely different from what you do in your day-to-day. Just do one thing for yourself, by yourself. That's it. If you can do that, I would love it. That'd be the biggest gift you could give to me.
That was Monica Rivera, host of You Want to Do What? Podcast. Subscribe to her show. Do it. And then leave a review. And while you're at it, leave a review for me too. If you're listening in Apple Podcasts, it's super easy to do it in your app. Just scroll down from the episode description and you will see a little place where you can tap a 5-star or whatever star rating. And then there is a link to submit a review. If you do, I'll read it on the show. Don't forget, if you're coming to Podcast Movement, I would love to connect with you. Really want to see you at my talk Wednesday morning, but anytime during the conference, just reach out, let me know, and we'll get together. Also, if you happen to be an aspiring, new, or current podcaster, check out my other newer show, Podcast Envy, and learn all about how to craft a podcast that matters. You can find it at podcastenvy.com and in all the places that one finds podcasts. On our upcoming episode of The Creative Imposter, you're going to hear a little story from me all about how losing my iPhone was like a bad breakup. What does an iPhone have to do with imposter syndrome? Well, you'll see. Links to all the places where you can connect with Monica will be in the show notes for this episode at thecreativeimpastor.com/070 for episode 70. And I highly recommend her Instagram feed, which I find to be very motivational and not in a corny way, but in a best girlfriend kind of way. Again, that's thecreativeimpastor.com/070. This episode was mixed as always by Edwin Ruiz of Mondo Machine. Our theme music is by Jovia Armstrong. I thank you so much for listening. And this week, I'm hoping you get a chance to get the nudge you need to try new things. Stole that from Monica's tagline.